In today's episode, I had the pleasure of talking to the brilliant Jo Royle, a former ocean racing skipper and founder of Common Sea. Jo's journey is pretty extraordinary. She has skippered boats across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, across the Antarctic Circle, and even to the Sundarbans. And keep listening if you don't know where the Sundarbans are. Her most significant venture afloat, though, may well be co-designing and skippering the Plastiki. This 60-foot catamaran made from 12,000 discarded plastic drinks bottles sailed 8,000 miles across the Pacific, sparking a crucial conversation on marine plastic pollution. Jo's now the founder of Common Seas, and in our chat we delve into the inspiration behind what she's doing now, the work they're doing, which includes some pretty alarming research that found microplastics in human blood. Jo Royle, the ocean is clearly, or certainly seems to be, a big part of your life. Where did this start? Where does this come from?
Feel like I've always had a strong connection to the ocean and been really drawn to the sea. And then I was very fortunate to have some wonderfully inspiring sea creatures in my life, my father being one. And then my first boyfriend who taught me a love for voyaging. And then I was really fortunate to go to have my first job at sea under an old salty sea dog called Trevor Vincent, who I crossed many oceans with, and he took me under his wing and made any rough ocean seem like a breeze. So I think, yeah, but to me, like the ocean is plays a big kind of character in my life. I have a relationship with it, a bit like I do with my family, which maybe sounds a bit strange.
You need to elaborate. I mean, I'm intrigued by that. Where are you going with
Well,
that
I
one?
just think that, in my life, and I'm sure to you as well, like you have this. I live by the sea. I spend as much time as possible in or on the sea, and I have this constant communication with the the ocean, which is like crazy because it's huge. But it makes you feel it's always a place that answers my questions, makes
Mm.
me feel balanced and back inside myself.
You describe yourself as a former racing skipper. You've been to the Antarctic, across the Atlantic, the Sundarbans. I had to actually look those up. They're south coast of Bangladesh, isn't that right?
Yeah,
Sort
I
of Bay
mean,
of Bengal.
India, Bangladesh. Yeah.
I've not been there. You've done a lot of sailing, a lot of it competitively. What are one or two lessons from that world that stick with you in the work you're doing today?
I think that we're incredibly capable if we work with nature, focus, if we look after each other. And I think, working at sea, you learn to understand that growth doesn't come from a comfortable place sometimes.
Mm.
And I think that that's a really strong teaching that takes me through life. Maybe you can resonate with that.
That rings true with me for sure. Well, speaking of uncomfortable times, what was? Can you pick a single toughest challenge that you faced on the ocean?
I think there's so many, isn't there? Because, there's those days like when you've been at sea for a long time and there's no wind and you're going backwards and you're racing and that's incredibly frustrating. So managing that. And then there's those days where, the wind is hurricane force and it's the middle of the night and something at the top of the mast breaks and that's physically, takes it all out of you. So I think there's all the extremes from incredible boredom to incredible adrenaline, and I think
Mm.
that's the wonderful thing about spending months and months living in the middle of an ocean.
Mm. What has it taught you about getting on with other people? Because I think I can empathize in part. Like I've spent 108 nights sharing a
Right,
tent with one other person,
right,
changed our underwear 3 times, shared a pee bottle at night. But
yeah,
that was only half the time. Like during the day, we were apart from each other. We would take it in turns to navigate, swap over. Not a huge amount of interaction, and
good,
there's a lot of sort of personal space during the day. But I'm kind
yeah,
of guessing. I mean, I've done a little bit of sailing, but the longest trip was less than a week. So what's it like being, that sort of enforced, sort of cohabitation of a small space in challenging conditions? What's it taught you about human dynamics.
I suppose your experience is quite like double-handed racing, where you're at sea for quite a long period of time, but you're quite often exchanging sleep patterns, you know. Look, I think that working at sea is a beautiful experience with people that haven't spent much time with, and you jump on a boat and you have the shared goal of keeping each other safe and getting to the destination, sometimes as quick as possible or sometimes as efficiently as possible. And I think, you know, you learn how to be comfortable in each other's space and to understand the kind of ebbs and flows of emotions within a community, and actually that kind of emotional intelligence is really relied upon. So yeah, this is like actually moving ashore is the one thing that I miss, you know, those nights where you're underneath the most incredible skies, sharing stories with people that, you know, you maybe hadn't known a few days before.
Very cool. Actually, something I've not had in my 24-hour daylight in the high Arctic and Antarctica when I'm up there.
Oh,
Well, I'm
you didn't
there,
have?
of
Yeah,
course.
of
Never,
course.
never had a shared, starry night in the middle of nowhere on an expedition. So,
Of course.
gosh, maybe it's time to
Yeah,
switch
there you
disciplines.
go. We should play.
We met a long, long time ago before a big
Mm,
project called Plastiki, and I remember when I heard about that. So it happened in 2010 or set sail in 2010. Is that right? So
yeah.
a while ago. I thought at the time, cool project, and that was in some ways maybe ahead of its time in getting us to rethink plastic, how we use plastic. But what sparked the idea, and how did you get involved?
So I think it was 2009. And at the time, we were just starting to hear about Captain Charles Moore, who'd been sailing back from the Transpac, ocean race that took him to Hawaii. And he'd come back and discovered this garbage patch of plastic in the middle of the Pacific. And we all had these kind of images, didn't we, that we could go and live out there or go and clean it up and solve the plastic problem. And, you know, it's all really interesting articles that were being shared. Then the United Nations came out with an article that, you know, predicting that plastic would be one of these existential crises of our generation. And this article had really captured the imagination of David Rothschild. You know, he's a wonderful creative mind, and he decided that, right, I'm going to build a raft and sail it out to this island of plastic and tell everyone about it. And then through our relationship, I think how we met as well, through the Royal Geographical Society, David and I were introduced. I was a sailing skipper at the time and managed some boat build projects. So I got involved. I jumped at the chance of getting involved, obviously. Flew out to San Francisco and to see the raft, was greeted by a pile of 12,000 plastic bottles. We proceeded to spend I'd probably 12 months, you know, working some incredible minds to turn those bottles into a raft that was capable of safely transporting 5 lives across the biggest ocean, the Pacific Ocean. It was at a time that there was a role to play in connecting people to the environment and to our life source. And the Plastiki was an incredible storytelling platform, and one that obviously I'm biased because I was fortunate to be involved with, but you don't see it really captured people's imagination and played that role in bringing awareness that actually what we buy on land and our material choices on land have far reaching impacts. So yeah, an incredible part of my
Mm.
life.
Very cool. It certainly caught my imagination. I guess in the decade and a bit since plastic, what changes have you noticed in the way that people think about or deal with plastic pollution?
Well, the first change that is important to touch on is that there's more plastic being produced every year on year. So that is an unfortunate change. And I think that was really kind of a motivating, you know, to land in, we sailed from San Francisco to Sydney, and to land in Sydney after kind of this 2 year really voyage, building the boat, sailing it for 3.5 months across the Pacific, to land in Sydney with so much energy from thousands of people that had supported us, going, right, what do we do? What do we do about this? So knowing that actually every day there's more and more plastic being pumped out into the ocean, that was a real kind of shifted my life really to work on tackling plastics. So now the role of campaigners like my organization has moved from kind of awareness raising. Like what is wonderful is that everyone knows, every government we work with, every business, no one wants our ocean to be choking on plastic. My organisation, Common Seas, has discovered plastic in our blood. We know that there's all these chemicals associated with it that are not good for us. And we all know this, no one wants it. And the other great thing is that we know how to solve it, right? So we've got the modelling would say that we have 80% of the solutions. So we know how to solve it. So we just need to get on and do it.
And you mentioned Plastiki as clearly it was a brilliant platform to tell an important story, and it's a story that is potentially quite gloomy, quite depressing. Like, what do you think about the importance of storytelling when it comes to the climate, the environment, the natural world, and what we're doing to it?
Yeah. I mean, we were really careful with the Plastiki because originally we were building this raft of rubbish to sail it out to an island of rubbish, right? And we went to National Geographic to say, look, can you film us? And they were like, what? A story about a negative story about rubbish. And that really made us rethink the whole voyage, right? So the Plastiki was all about circular design principles. And it was, how do we build product with the least toxicity using materials that have a life that harnesses as much of their natural resources as possible. So I think positive but factual storytelling plays a huge role in connecting us with and empowering us to live in more balance with nature.
I think certainly in the last 10 years, something that was not on my radar at all, and now very much is, and I think your work's a big part to play in that, is microplastics, which is a term, a word that certainly wasn't on my radar a few years ago,
Yeah.
and now it is. Your study around microplastics in our, like most of us, demonstrably have microplastics in our blood. I remember reading that last year at about the same time that I'd read a study there were 19 sample sites in the Ross Sea area of Antarctica and the Ross Ice Shelf. So 19 snow sample sites, every single one contained microplastics. And this is a place where I spent many weeks of my life, or months, if you sort of stretch it out into Antarctica continent. And I remember I was down there, this was 10 years ago, thinking that the snow that Taka, my teammate, and I were digging up every evening to melt to get our drinking water for the next 24 hours, thinking, oh, this must be the most pristine, water on earth right now that we're drinking every single day. I now know almost certainly that I was consuming microplastics. It can be microplastics can be transported, particularly as fibers, at least 6,000 kilometers. We know, like, why isn't this a bigger deal? And how do we dig ourselves out of this mess?
Well, I think that plastic is like visible climate change, isn't it? It's oil, and it's like you've got all macro, like large items of plastic will slowly fade into small particles of plastic, such as the particles that you are supping on in the Ross Shelf. We are surrounded with nanoplastics and microplastics, and the solution is to reduce the amount of production right up at the top, right? So that's how we stop it. And how do we motivate that stop? Well, then I think that the work in understanding the human health risks therefore is a real motivator, because therefore governments and business leaders have a real imperative, once they understand the science and the evidence of the toxicity of these plastic particles that are wrapping our lives.
Gosh, and plastics clearly play a pretty crucial role in so many things, and particularly things like medicine, where I gather there are a lot of things that there really aren't any viable non-plastic sort of replacements right now. And I was thinking, we are clearly both wearing woolen sweaters. Like, yeah, that wasn't planned or scripted, but I'm also holding a plastic pen and I'm talking to you on a monitor that's surrounded by plastic. With the production of plastics as you double in the next 2 decades, like, how do we balance the need, the demand with the environmental impact?
We think about plastic as these physical items that are around us, and we can picture the waste and the environment, and we can picture how that waste might get into our bodies, in the same way as we've seen it build up in the environment over our lifetime. But it's also important to kind of link it in with the fact that plastic, the growth of plastic is going to comprise 20% of the carbon budget. So if we think about the plastic, the petrochemicals, all the way through to the management. So it's actually critical to keeping to 1.5 or 2 degrees. We need to see a reduction of around 70% of single-use plastic use. So that's how it equates to these issues that people, climate change. And then also with biodiversity loss, plastic in the environment, as you've seen, and plastic spreads mismanaged waste, and it spreads disease incredibly fast across the corals and across marine habitats, which we're reliant on for our economies, tourism, and our food and well-being, right? So I just wanted to connect it more to, because I think, people think, oh, you're just trying to ban the straw or ban the bottle. And it's like, no, this is like, we are interconnected. Just because we're Common Seas and my work is focused on plastic, it's also, focusing on climate change and biodiversity, and we're all connected that way. And yeah, we're not saying like we need a world without plastic. We just need a world with a very sensible use of plastic. And what does that mean? It means that, okay, well, what are those items where it's really valuable? It's a really intelligent material in many ways, isn't it? It's very cheap, it's very durable. It needs to be used very, very, very sensibly. And things like some health wrappings for medicines that we could use that are probably healthier for us. But it's the packaging, right? That we just don't need single-use plastic packaging. We need very, very little of it. And we need to think when we extract resource out of nature, we need to think of how do we keep that value of nature in the economy for as long as possible. And actually, it's a complete myth that we can recycle plastic, because actually the tensile, the material strength of it, the properties of plastic are not endlessly recyclable. And actually, with the growth of production growing, doubling within the next 20 years, within now, I keep saying that, but the years tick on, plastics production's doubling. Only 12% of that volume will be managed by recycling. So we really need to reduce production.
I spoke to someone a while ago, just a random chat with a stranger traveling somewhere who this was his world. And he said, well, the thing is we can't, at the moment, can't recycle it into food grade plastic. So it's sort of worrying to think it's more nuanced than most people realize. And there are some things, like aluminium that are theoretically sort of infinitely recyclable. What are some of the most interesting sort of plastic replacements that you see? Like what's exciting you at the moment?
So what excites me? So my household deliveries excite me when I get my groceries from reusable, and delivered in Hessian sacks, and I post the sacks back, and I get my detergents delivered. There's a lot of joy in it, and it feels really healthy, So there's lots of ways that we can live without plastic.
And with your work at Common Seas, it's fascinating thinking about the sort of disconnect in a lot of people's minds, and I can imagine the frustration of people assuming that what you're about is these sort of totemic things like, oh, it's the drinking straw or the single use plastic carry bag from the supermarket. But as you've explained, like this is a big part of a vast systemic challenge. But with your work at Common Seas, like what approaches have really made a difference in pushing for change?
I think that at Common Seas, we're about 20 people based internationally across Indonesia, Maldives, Greece, UK. It's a really wonderful experience to work with different people from different backgrounds from all over the world to solve this problem. And together we design and demonstrate solutions to tackle the root cause of the problem. So we're really focusing on reduction of production. And when you kind of look at what we do, I suppose, in a nutshell, what we do is we provide the people with the power, with the knowledge that they need to feel engaged and empowered to act, right? And what do we mean by that? So we have, like you've touched on, we have this lab in Imperial University, which is looking at how plastic particles are building up in our body and what harm that might cause us. And then we have a series of kind of modeling tools that support countries to be able to, and businesses, to be able to model their plastic emissions. So they can really see then what plastics they're using, what's flowing through their economy, where it's being wasted, in what volume, and then we can overlay and solution scenarios. And that's like, bringing together, they have then the visualization and the evidence to bring together all the disparate stakeholders, because you're trying to switch a linear system where you've got someone designing the product and a marketing agent all the way up here with someone picking it up in a river, like never ever speaking. So what we can do with our modeling and our visualizations is bring everyone around the facts, and then together you've got that collective knowledge and experience to design the solutions.
What are you sort of banging your head against, right?
Understanding the harm that plastic particles are causing in our bodies. So it's really tricky. We've had to build new machinery to be able to see microplastics amongst our very sticky blood protein. And now we've got tissue samples from the intestine and the brain, and we'd love to do the lung as well. And everything we do is very, very slow, because we're activists working with scientists, very, very slow, and it feels very small scale in comparison to the production, to the rate of production. But every time we learn something, it's bad news, and that's starting to concern me, right? So, and and like you've said, and we've both had the utter privilege to experience in our life, is that we've seen pristine nature, which is really, really rare now. It was the normal when we started our work in exploring these wild places, and now it's a precious. And I think that concerns me. Just kind of thinking, God, are we going to do the same in our bodies now? And I think that if we can accelerate that understanding, then we really have the knowledge, right, to make the right decision. And people in, our leaders in business and government, they want to make the right decision by us. That's why they've chosen those jobs. So that's my oh gosh, I just wish that I had a whole lab, and like lots more, scaling that up.
What is next on your agenda for tackling plastic pollution, preserving the oceans?
So we're going to scale up our research into human health impacts. We're going to support more governments, particularly what we'd call low middle income governments, to have their plan to reduce by the 70%, which is required to keep us under 1.5 and 2 degrees temperature. We're comfortable in doing that and scaling that up. So that's our focus. I'd love to do more, obviously, but I've realised that we need to focus.
I've got a couple of bonus round questions. Is there a movie or a book or a story that you think people should read or watch or whatever listen to about climate or the oceans? Something educational, inspiring?
Yeah, I think anything by Barry Lopez, maybe The Arctic Dreams or Horizon. He's a naturalist that really, really gets it, travelled to, I don't know, many countries, spent a lot of time with Indigenous people, and writes beautifully, transports you to the Arctic. Yeah. So maybe
The Arctic Dreams I read, loved.
Yeah.
I sort of partly blame Barry Lopez and maybe Rob McFarlane and Bruce Chatwin. We could lump in this with for why I've not yet written my own book, because they're so good. So yeah, Arctic Dreams. I will second that recommendation, Barry Lopez, and I should probably dig out a few more of his. Last question, and maybe you've given us the answer to this already, but if you had £1 billion to spend with no strings attached on fixing the environment, how would you use it? Buying some better machines for the lab, maybe?
You know what I think I would do? What would I do with that? Wow, the dream. It's paralyzing. I think I would start by ensuring that during school we learn to meditate, and we learn about kind of yoga nidra, like sleep meditation, that takes us all the way back into ourselves. So I would introduce yoga nidra to all schools. So all schools, they started with it.
Love it.
Because I
Not
think
the answer I was expecting.
yeah, I think that's the revolution we need now, right? We've got all the solutions. We're living at this time of great knowledge. We've got all the solutions we need. Actually, if we feel connected to ourselves and connected to nature, that's going to enable us to roll our sleeves up and get on and do the right thing.
Very cool. Well, as you know, I've been a sort of weird kind of, I always saw myself as an athlete rather than an explorer in the old-fashioned sense when I was doing the big polar expedition. But so I've always geeked out about the sort of physical training and nutrition and psychology. And I came across something a while ago, which was sort of being billed as it was NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. Turns
Yeah.
out it's yoga nidra. It's exactly the same thing. It's just dressed up in a way that makes sense to me as a nerd. You know? So
Yeah.
there we go, Jo. What a pleasure! Thank you. Very cool story. I've learned a few things today. Hopefully, a few others have as well. The work you're doing is really inspiring, and thank you for joining us on New Frontiers.
Oh, thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you for joining me on New Frontiers. For more stories and insights, you can visit my website, bensaunders.com, and please don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. I want to leave you with a thought from Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen, who wrote this in 1928. It is a difficult time you are living in, no doubt, and the world does not give you a bright outlook just now, perhaps. But it is an interesting time. Many important things are happening, and it is full of great problems for you to solve. It is you who have to create the future and make the world a better place to live.